The issue of homelessness is a big discussion today.
There was times when I would sleep in parks or over my friend's house, or I would just be out in the streets. At one point in my life, I could have gone down a path where probably years in prison or not being here today.
In the African American community, over 70% of our children are being raised by single parents. And so you have this social contagion.
Homelessness is one of the only issues where you could be labeled for something that you don't have and then punished for trying to survive it.
Well, I am excited to welcome you, Terence, to our Unbound Podcast. It's exciting to have you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share today.
Well, you know, you have quite a story. It's outlined in your book, From Dropout to Doctorate. And so I want to just talk about your story. I want to hear, we all have a story.
Yes.
And the ins and outs, the roller coaster ride of life. And when we can learn from other people's story as it either intersects with our story or expands our horizons to know that our story isn't the only story that's out there,
right.
then we can be mutually beneficial to each other as people. And so I want to know your story from you, not just from the book. We got the book right here on the table, but when we have the person, it's like reading about Jesus. It's one thing to read about Jesus in the Bible, but having Jesus come off the pages in the Bible and affect your life is another level of experience.
That's right.
And so I want this to be for me and for those who don't know you or who do know you but can learn more about you to hear your story. So give me the highlights, because we'll dig deep as we go along here.
Yeah, I mean, normally when I talk to people, like even in this moment I'm talking to you, I would say I traveled a long way to be here. And I'm not just talking about by plane. I'm talking about the journey of overcoming poverty, experiences with homelessness as early as teenage years, dropping out of high school, being involved in a gang. At one point in my life, I could have gone down a path where my trajectory would have ended in probably years in prison or not being here today. But Jesus changed all of that for me. And it took a lot of grit, resilience, community embracing me, but also a willingness on my behalf to borrow the courage and the confidence of others that they had in me long before I had it in myself, and really being open to what God was doing in my life early on. And I experienced a transformation. And I thank my mother, my father, who is now not with us anymore, my community, all of the people that God placed in my life at pivotal moments where it could have ended in ways that just wouldn't have been good, right? And so I traveled a long way to be here. And, I knew of you reading your books and all of that stuff long before I ever thought I would be having this conversation with you, long before a PhD, long before graduating with a degree, long before.
Make me feel real old right now. But
yeah, I'm just saying, it's one of those journeys. So I traveled a long way to be here.
Well, I'm glad you made it here, and I'm glad of what God did to bring you here. Let's roll it back a little bit. Homelessness, okay? So talk to me about, because this is early stages of life. So how did that happen, and what was the environment that brought you to this place of not having a home?
Yeah, I mean, my mom was a single parent, which I'm sure we'll talk about her resilience and how I embody a lot of what she displayed to me and my sister, and just to our family early on. But there were times when we were moving around from place to place, and she was trying to get settled. I grew up in a red line community in the city of Atlanta, that had a lot of poverty. I saw my mom work multiple jobs, trying to care for my sister and I as a single parent. I did not really have a male figure in my life. My father was around and we had relationships, but it was really hard to get direction or even see school as being something that was viable for my growth and my ability to overcome a lot of the entrapments that was in the environment that I was growing up in. And I internalized a lot of things that my family went through, especially the conflict. I mean, I experienced a lot of trauma growing up. And in my teenage years, my mom was really trying to show me tough love and fulfill two roles, right, of both mother and father. But at that point, I was just not in an open place to really hear. And so we had a lot of conflict at home, and I ended up running away. There was times when I would sleep in parks or over my friend's house, or I would just be out in the streets just because of a lot of the emotional trauma that I was carrying at that time. And I'll never forget, it was one night I was standing at a gas station. I was begging for change, right? There was no cell phones. You had to use a payphone back in the day. And this guy, it was a school night. I had just left home, and this guy walks into the store, and I asked him for change because I wanted to call my friend and his father. And he looks at me and he says, "Why are you out here at night?" I'm like, I just want change. He comes back out and he throws me 2 quarters. I remember one falling on the ground, and I caught one with my hand. I just remember the shame that I felt being out there as a teenager on my own. And then I walk over to the payphone and I call my friend Eric. Eric's father was a pastor. His name was Mr. Moore. He helped people who were experiencing homelessness. He had a small church in the city of Atlanta. He had transitional housing, all of those things. But more than that, he was just a man that I saw loved his family. I mean, they ate dinner around the table. He was just really present. And I asked Eric on the phone, I said, "Hey, E, you mind if I could come over? I need something to eat." He puts down the phone hesitantly, but he did. He goes to ask his parents if I could come over. And he says on the phone, I'll never forget these words, "Come on over, my family loves you." I remember going over to their home and Mr. Moore walking over to my car. He tells me to roll down the window. I roll down the window. He taps me on my chest. It's the first time I could ever look a man in his eyes. And he says, "Young man, you're going to be a leader one day." And, it's like, how could you see something in me? I'm dealing with teachers labeling me in school because they don't understand my social location or the things I was navigating. How are you calling me a leader when I have conflict at the house? How are you calling me a leader when I'm saying that I'm going to sleep in a park tonight because I don't feel comfortable at home? How are you calling me a leader? I don't have a solid relationship at that moment with my father. And he called out goodness in me. He became a mentor. It was one of the men that I asked, should I put myself through college? He was right there, yes. Should I marry her? Yes. And later became the person that said, I think God was, calling you into ministry and encouraged me to pursue that. And so, I just remember those vivid stories, and I'm talking and talking, but
it's okay.
It's just like
it's rich.
Yeah, these are things that kind of God used early on to shape my experience.
Well, there's a whole bunch to unpack there, so let's do some unpacking. You didn't pack that suitcase for
okay,
brother.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the original thing you said, and that is your father was really not there.
Yeah.
The absence of a father. We're hearing a lot today in news media and culture about the role of men and what happens when they are there and when they are not there.
Yeah.
The burden that puts on the mother as a single parent, the burden that puts on the children of not having that role model in their lives, and of course, the scripture is full of what men are called to do
Yes.
in becoming the leader and stabilizer and stability for the family.
Yes.
And when that piece becomes missing, it creates a void that can open up a hole that can be very difficult to climb out of.
Yes.
So the absence of father, now we're living in a day when in the African-American community, over 70% of our children are being raised by single parents. And so you have this social contagion
Yes.
that is undermining the hope and development and progress of a whole race of people. And that's spreading to other communities too, not quite maybe at that degree, but we're still feeling the repercussions, whether it's poverty or crime
Yes.
or hopelessness or lack of direction or family stability, the absence of a man. So let's talk about that because that's such a foundational stage.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the feelings you had about not having a man in your life at that early stage and the burden that put on your mother and then on you winding up being homeless.
Yeah. I remember the disruption of home. I was around, I don't know, I had to be 5 or 6. I remember my mom vividly. I write about it in the book. Her taking me and my sister. She was carrying my younger sister, and we were walking away from violence. I remember that was the first experience where home as a concept was disrupted, right? And, you know, I see, like in retrospect, even looking back, like a lot of my work is around homelessness and home and what that actually means. But home should be a place where safety is present, right? And I realized at a young age that I wasn't going to have a home anymore, meaning in terms of my mother and father would not be in the same house. I internalized that a lot. I remember as early on, one experience I had going to school, I showed up in elementary school and I had just witnessed something very traumatic the night before, sitting in the classroom, and the teacher was going around like calling on different students and asking for answers and passing out things. And she got to me and I didn't say anything. And my voice felt frozen. And you know how she responded? She responded to me by putting me in a closet. She had me pick up my desk and take it, and it was like a little storage closet. And I still remember my peers in the classroom laughing and taunting me. And she didn't have any understanding that my family had just been split up, or what I was carrying at a young age. And even the sense of home in school was disrupted, right? And the sense of belonging. And you asked me about the role of a father. A father is someone, even as my role as a father, gives guidance. A father is someone who offers mentorship, allows their children to see their vulnerabilities in a way where maybe you're teaching from your mistakes. A father is one that can call out purpose or speak life into a child. A father is someone who sets the tone and example of a house. A father is a protector and a provider, and so a lot of the different things. And I think the absence of that, it just made me really, really upset. And I felt myself early on searching, you know, because, you know, even I have children now, I tell them who they are. I remind them of their worth. I remind them of how God has fashioned them. We sit down and we have conversations. I teach them from my vulnerabilities, and I get a chance to become something to them that I reconcile with my father later in life. Which is a present father who is courageous in being vulnerable, right? Which is something that I believe our kids so desperately needs. My children, you know, it's been stated that by psychologists that a child goes through 3 phases. One is idolization. The second phase is demonization,
Okay.
right? And the third phase is humanization. And although my father wasn't present as much as I would have wanted early in my life, before he passed the last 7 years of his life, he became one of my best friends.
Wow. So you had a little redemption of relationship there, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I'm just reflecting. My father has been gone for a while, but I had the privilege of having the kind of father that you described a father ought to be.
Yeah.
That I had that privilege. And I can hear the difference, even though I grew up in urban Baltimore, I can hear the difference of having somebody there who was speaking into your life, who was bringing God and putting him on the front page of our home, and who was making sure, we went to church, and who was correcting us when we were wrong, That presence matters. And we're having so many of our young people, and young men in particular, who are not having that in their life. And that's why it's critical that God gave you a father-like figure to step into that place at a critical time. So, and he was a pastor, you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was a pastor, but he just wasn't a pastor for the big flock.
Yeah.
He was a personal shepherd for you in that role. So talk to me a little bit about him. You gave me some highlights, but because what I'm hearing is he saw you as an individual and he began to speak life into you.
Yeah.
And you began to look at life differently.
Yeah. Mr. Moore was, he was a very manly kind of guy, a man of few words in his presence, but from behind a pulpit, he would preach and have a lot of energy. But the thing that I learned from being around him was the value of family. Like, he would invite me over sometimes. Obviously, I was friends with his son, but he would sit me down around the table and we would have discussions, and his mom would talk about, Eric's mom would talk about the Lord, and Mr. Moore would, join in the conversation and talk about the Lord. He was the person that would also tell you, like, if you had any questions, no matter what questions they were, like, come to me and ask me. I would rather you ask me questions versus you going out and trying to figure out something and you don't have any wisdom or wise counsel. He was the type of person that would give you the last out of his pocket. There were many times when I didn't have gas money and he would pull me aside and give me gas money and just say, keep going. He was the type of person, even when he did not have all of the resources, he used his words as resources to encourage you.
I need to write that down. Your words are a valuable resource.
Yeah, are a valuable resource because, people don't necessarily become what you want them to become. They become what you encourage them to become. And he was.
That's another drop mic moment. So you got all these drop mic moments.
Yeah, and he was an encourager. He would talk to me also about his struggles, the challenges that he had to overcome, the small town that he came from, the social challenges that he faced. Mr. Moore was the first person I ever went to when I told him I felt like the Lord was calling me into ministry. And he sat me down one day and he asked me all these series of questions, like, what does it feel like? What are you sensing? At that time, I was saying that I wanted to go to Bible college, and I had given my life to the Lord, and I really wanted to change my life. And you know what he said to me? He didn't have any, prescriptive statements or anything like that. He says, never be afraid to miss God. And I say, what do you mean by that, Mr. Moore? He says, if you ever feel like God is placing something on your heart, you should try it, because the worst thing you could do is God directs your steps to where he really wants you to be. And I listened to that. I listened to it so much that I submitted myself to a church. I was discipled by, a lot of older deacons. My circle started changing. Like some of my best friends started to become people who were twice my age. And I became a questionary because I realized that not only could I expand.
A lot of people haven't used that word, questionary.
Yeah, not a visionary, but because questions lead to vision, right?
You're inquisitive.
Yeah,
you wanted some answers.
I wanted some answers because I couldn't get those answers early on in life.
Now, I love words. Yeah. I've never used the word questionary.
Yes.
Until now.
Okay.
I'm going to pick that one up.
Yeah. I started to realize that I could learn from all people, no matter where I went, especially people who had journeyed the road a little further than I had.
Well, when you talked about that he allowed you to be around his table, Psalm 128 verse 3 says your children will become olive plants around your table. And it takes 15 years for an olive plant to become a full-grown olive tree. But if the roots run deep enough, it'll produce olives for 2,000 years. Over in the Garden of Gethsemane in Israel, they got 2,000-year-old olive trees still pumping out olives because their roots run so deep. Right. So the fact that he let you at his table and was able to allow some of those roots to take root, and now you're a full-grown olive tree. You're producing it for so many others, including your own family and children. So that's exciting that he welcomed you to his table. And another thing that you said was that you went from a man to a group of men, deacons at the church. So your circle of male impact and influence that you didn't have early on for your father, but God gave you many fathers or many mentors, as we would say, who poured into you. And if we could catch that vision, particularly as a church, because you brought the church into it, they're deacons, that means they tied to the church.
Yes.
That the church, it wasn't just a place where you went to raise your hands, pray and praise and hear sermons preached, but where there was life investment and community. And so we've gotten away from that. We need to get back to that if we want to save a generation.
That's right. I remember, I had an experience where I gotten into some trouble. I was in a jail cell. I was away at college. My mom comes down. I had went back to school as a fifth-year senior, graduated. My mom comes down. The charges were dropped. While I was in jail for a night, there was another inmate. He was a young guy. He had got pulled over for not having his license. And he started talking to me. And out of the blue, he starts talking to me about the Lord, right? And telling me that God loves me. And I was like, bro, like, why are you talking to me like this, And he says, well, I'm in here, my license. And I was like, why don't you call your parents? He says, my parents are pastors and they're overseas right now. And it was mind-blowing to me because I'm like, I didn't come from that, right? I'm like, who has parents who are like overseas doing all of this work? And he shares the gospel with me. I get out. Before I go and get plugged into a church, I go to a small Bible study. I was invited by a friend. I give my life to the Lord. I get plugged into the church, and then I meet Mr. Eason. So Mr. Moore and then Mr. Eason. By this time, I'm changing. I'm growing. I have a commitment, and I'm like, man, I want to change my life. The pain that I experienced, there has to be something greater than what I've walked through, because I heard the pastor teaching through Romans, and he gets to this verse, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. I heard, that powerful message that God's love superseded anything that I had ever experienced, right? Wow. And I meet Mr. Eason. I tell Mr. Eason, because he was a deacon in the church. He was a real estate mogul. He was well known. He was older deacon. A lot of people respected him in the business community. And I stopped him one day. I found the courage to stop, because sometimes when you're looking for mentorship, questionary, right?
Yeah, I was getting ready to say that word. That word was right out there.
So I had my opportunity. We was about to pass each other. And I said, hey, Mr. Eason, do you mind if I ask you a question? And he says, yeah. I said, would you mind if I told you my story one day, my testimony? And he says, sure. He gave me his number, and he says, I'm going to invite you over to the house. He was just that open, right? He invites me over to the house. I sit him down, and I tell him about everything that I had journeyed through, what I was trying to overcome. And at this point, I was working in the back of a warehouse, and I was like, I have a dream. I want to go to college. Like, I want to finish my degrees, and I want to overcome, because I saw my mom, going to school and raising us. She went on to get her doctorate degree and stuff. And he says, "You have a school in mind?" And at this time, I said, "Yeah." It was a small Bible college in Atlanta, and I said I wanted to start here. And he says, "Why don't you just try to start?" I saved up half of a tuition check. I'll never forget. I reached out to the registrar. His name was Mr. Krogh, and I said, "Mr. Krogh, would you please allow me just to start school? I'll work up the money, whatever." And Mr. Krogh allowed me to start. And Mr. Eason started to invite me over more and more and mentor me. And then finally, he started to say, "I want to support." He helped me pay for my undergrad degree. He became a mentor. He told me that the Lord was going to use my story, that I would overcome. He walked my wife down the aisle. You met my wife earlier. We just made 19 years of marriage. We have 2 wonderful kids. Both Mr. Moore passed away the first year I started Love Beyond Walls. He was the first person to say, I believe God is leading you to start a organization to serve those who are unhoused. And then Mr. Eason passed a couple years ago. And one of the last text messages Mr. Eason sent me, because he had watched my journey over the last 17 years, becoming a husband, going to school, earning a PhD, advocating for those who are unhoused, helping people transition out of homelessness, becoming a man, taking responsibility, being vulnerable, growing in the Lord, growing in my faith, being committed to my wife, loving my children, and showing up in that way. And he says these words, and I have it in my phone. He says, "You're one of the greatest investments I ever made."
Wow.
This guy developed subdivisions, apartment complexes, all of these, properties and stuff. And it just, like, he had enough faith to realize that it wasn't just about material resources. It was the treasures that he was storing up in heaven by the types of investments that he was making in people. And when you talk about mentorship and the importance of being proximate to people, it says in the scripture, Jesus dwelt among them. A part of that dwelling is proximity, how we stand in solidarity with people even through their lowest moments. And I am a product of the Mr. Easons, the Mr. Moores, the Miss West, my 10th grade geometry teacher when I was a 5th-year senior who championed me to continue. My mother, who modeled that resilience as a Black woman, caring for 2 children on her own, going to graduate classes long before online classes ever existed. And I'm sitting out in the hall as a child witnessing her model what it means to go that extra mile. And then even hearing my mother just the other day say, not only was she proud, but she wanted to do that and make that sacrifice to plant those seeds. And so I think this is all about seeds. We never know what kind of seeds we are sowing, right? Paul sow, Apollos waters, but it's God that gets the increase, right? And so that's...
Well, you are a beneficiary of incarnational Christianity.
That's right.
Okay? That's right. Get a little technical.
Yeah.
Incarnational Christian. You mentioned the fact that, he dwelt among us. The word became flesh.
That's right.
And dwelt, tabernacled among us,
that's
John
right.
1 says. And so that's the incarnation, God becoming a man so that he is among men.
Yes.
God becomes touchable.
That's right.
And when we do what was done to you and for you, God became touchable, reachable, and visible in human form as he worked through people who touched your life. And that's exciting to hear and to see. So let's talk about now the educational move.
Yeah.
Okay, you were a dropout.
Yeah.
So how old were you when you dropped out, or what grade were you in?
I was in between 10th and 11th grade. 11th grade.
And you were out for how long?
Probably half a year.
Half a year, okay. Yes. And then you were encouraged to go back and finish high school?
Yeah. I was actually encouraged by a veteran. I was at a YMCA
So this is another man?
Yeah.
Okay, so you just you got men popping up all over. Okay.
The day I dropped out of school, I walked out of the front door. I was at an alternative school. It's open campus, Frank McLaren. I'm walking away, and this man experiencing homelessness calls over to the group. It's just 4 of us, me and 3 of my other friends. I was the only one to respond. So I walk over to the guy. I mean, trash hanging from his beard. He told me he hadn't showered in 2 weeks, and he says, young man, is that your school back there? I was like, yes, sir. And he says, whatever you do, and he looked himself up and down. He says, you don't want to end up out here on the streets like me. Keep getting your education. And he tells me this. This is a
homeless guy telling you this.
Yes.
Okay.
He says, one day you're gonna become a leader. That was a moment of disruption for me, where it caused me to really think. I eventually dropped out, but that seed was sown, and I'll never forget. I got to a place where I was like, I asked my mom, I was like, should I go and get my GED? And during that time, historically, 80s, 90s, GEDs were stigmatized towards Black people, where, if you got those, you weren't offered jobs or given opportunities. My mom said, you're not getting a GED. She advocated for me to go back to high school as a 5th-year senior. Most embarrassing time of my life. I go back, and I'm walking around the school. There are teachers there. Why is he still here? Peers. I was supposed to graduate the year before, calling me super senior. I had no margin for error. And then I get my schedule, and I end up in Miss West's classroom. Miss West, 10th grade geometry teacher. I'm sitting in class, despondent, and I'm like sad, upset. And she practices trauma-informed care and pedagogy long before these terms becomes popular. She tells me to stay after class one day. She tells me to stay after class one day, and she looks at me in my eyes. She says, I want you to use my classroom as a sanctuary. I was like, what? I didn't know those terms back then. And she was like, just a place to, if you need to, decompress, or if you feel overwhelmed, just come in here. And she says, you're brilliant. She became a champion. My mom became a champion. I graduate. And then I started dreaming about education and really seeing that I had something to offer, because I would have these random people who were strangers who became like family said that I had a gift, when I spoke, when I did certain things, and I would always be encouraged to pursue education. And my mom was the main one. You got to become more. You got to become the first male in your family to get a degree. You have to go back and get your graduate education. You have to have a plan. My mom was a product of a HBCU. She modeled what it meant to work multiple jobs and go to school, get multiple graduate degrees, and she would always communicate to me. My mom showed up at my PhD celebration after I defended my dissertation, and she flew in, and we just had a moment where she was like, I always knew you could do it. And my father, around this time, my father is diagnosed with cancer. He wasn't able to attend, but by this time we built a bond. My father had a stroke, and I was able to go and serve him. And I didn't even know, because we weren't on talking terms at that point. And I asked my wife, sometimes they say the wife is the second Holy Spirit, right? Jokingly, right?
Sometimes you can confuse them for the first Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Just like a voice of reason. And I say, what should I do? My dad was in the hospital. She says, you serve strangers every single day through the organization. Go serve your father. Brought this scripture to mind, Mark 10:45, for the Son of Man did not come to be served, but the servant. That's my, and I had to live it. I show up and serve my dad, and my dad's paralyzed. They did an emergency surgery on him. He was able to regain momentum, but I'll never forget my dad turning his head, looking at me. He says, son, I'm glad you're here. He calls me T. He's like, T, I'm glad you're here, man. And then he goes on to tell me, I believe the Lord spared my life for us to reconnect. I helped my dad walk through that experience. I kept serving him, and then my dad started calling me every day. And we would have all these discussions, and it felt kind of like strange at first, but then we would start ending the conversation with, I love you. And then my dad would ask me, like, when are you preaching again? Or when are you speaking? I want to come hear you. I remember the first time my dad ever came to hear me preach, and afterwards he told me, like, you're one of my favorite preachers. He started going to church and all this stuff. And by the end of I think it was 2017 going into 2018, my father calls me one day and he's just like, I want you to come see me get baptized.
Oh,
Me
wow.
and my family show up. It was just us. I get to see my father baptized. So we became close friends. He would show up to my book signings. He would support, and like we were able to find forgiveness. And my dad would come over and go fishing with me and my son, and we started to reconnect. And I talk about this, and then he's diagnosed with cancer, and he allowed me to become his caregiver and serve him. And I remember being in the hospital. I pulled out my phone because I wanted to record his audio because the doctor had just told me that there's nothing else they can do. And so I was like, hey, man, you start to talk about your faith, because even to the last day, he was like, the Lord is what, just, It was a totally different person, right? And I got a chance to experience that. And I say, you talk a lot about your faith now these days. What makes you start doing that? And in the hospital, my dad turns to me and he was like, well, once I started becoming more grounded in the Lord, you're the first person I told, and which I was. I was the first person. And he says these words, he says, that's a portion of you that came to me. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He says, because I saw your faith and I saw what you were doing for people. My dad was essentially telling me that the way that I was living my life was what encouraged him in his faith.
Well, this sounds like there is an aspect of forgiveness in all of this.
Oh, most definitely. That's the humanization piece.
Yeah, that you had to be willing to forgive and not let the past keep you from this fresh opportunity God had given you to connect with your dad and to inspire him spiritually.
Yes.
And that, the hope of that is don't give up on people.
That's right.
Don't give up because if you would have given up and you didn't listen to Holy Spirit number 2, your wife, and didn't seize the moment, carpe diem, seize the day, that could have been a missed spiritual impact and a missed reconciliation opportunity with your biological father.
Yeah.
And so that's rich, and I hope people will open up their hearts to the fact that forgiveness is a powerful tool for healing.
It's the most powerful tool. I have a phrase on my shirt. One of the last phrases my dad told me is forever forward. And that's one of the things that I carry with me. His name was Terence Lester. And he was a brilliant man, innovator. I learned to respect my father. I understood his humanity and his social location and his shaping, how he grew up in the community of D.C. During the heroin and crack epidemic. I understood how poverty and public policy shaped his life. I got a chance to see how some of the decisions that he made were just as common as some of the mistakes that we all make, right? And I got a chance to humanize him. But he would always tell me, T, whatever you do, always be forever forward. And I would even take that to suggest that we have to be forever forgiving, right? Because it opens our hearts up where bitterness does not live. Like, I had gotten to a place in my life where I didn't want bitterness to hold me back to the point where I would become toxic in my ministry or toxic in the way that I lead my family or in my relationship with my wife, or allow the traumas that I wasn't willing to confront be projected onto my children. My children are my legacy. Like, I don't hustle or do this work for my first name. I do it for my last name.
Wow. Great
And
statement.
that is because I want my ceiling to be my children's floor. There's a well-known quote that says, generational trauma can be passed from generation to generation. And there's a comma, and it says, but so can healing, right? And when we commit ourselves to being people who say, I'm going to break that generational curse, and I don't care if it takes forgiveness, I'm going to break that curse. I don't care if it's going to therapy to do the type of trauma and grief work needed, I'm going to break that curse. I don't care if it's confronting parts of myself that have been wounded. I'm going to confront that so I can continue to move forward. I don't care if it's getting plugged into a church and allowing myself to be seen to the point where men and women of God can walk with me as I navigate the transformation that God is doing in my life. I'm going to take that step. And so that is something that is very important. And I would tell anybody that forgiveness can be the key that continues to unlock your growth and doors to your future.
Well, that is so rich. And so I hope people are grabbing this, because you use the word toxic. Toxicity spiritually can ruin our development and keep somebody else from growing in their development.
Amen.
Because we're refusing the healing balm of forgiveness, and not seeking revenge and retaliation, which you could have done, but you chose not to do. So now move me to this educational passion.
Yeah.
That now you're Dr. Lester.
I started. Co-founded a nonprofit organization called Love Beyond Walls, based in Atlanta, Georgia. We've done work to advocate and stand with those who are unhoused, experiencing poverty. I've been doing this work, which I would consider ministerial work, for a little over a decade. And we've done anything from helping people recover identification cards, because when you're unhoused, public encampment suite, you could lose everything, your vital records, your birth certificate, everything, and you need ID to get ID. Helping people get access to public sanitation and hygiene, access to temporary housing. Our organization started the first museum in the United States that represents the subject of homelessness, to help build empathy and compassion towards the unhoused community, because stigma will cause people to distance themselves from whom God says he loves, right? Helping to reframe what it means to show up and be proximate to our neighbors without an address, helping people get access to food and developing skills that makes them employable, the whole nine, and mobilizing a community to surround people who are oftentimes forgotten. I started doing that work because I had lived through it, but then I started to ask questions. Why are things this way? Why do we create ordinances and laws that are more punitive than more caring? Why are there food deserts out there? Why do students show up to school and they're experiencing homelessness and they're being labeled because maybe they may act out and there isn't any trauma-informed care at the center of schools, and that can cause educational injustice, is what I'm defining in the book. And so I started asking all these questions, and I began to develop these philosophical inquiries. At that moment in time, I had achieved, theological studies grad degree, as well as a counseling master's degree, and I started to realize that I wanted to do more concentrated work for a PhD to study the effects of the community that I was serving. And most people say, well, why would you continue to get more education? And I see education as a tool to build more capacity for service, right? Education is nothing but a capacity building tool to serve more.
Say that one more time, just one more time.
Education is nothing but a capacity building tool to serve more. Education is not self-serving. You go to get education so you can understand how to serve. Jesus says, if you want to become great, then you have to serve. And so I understood that I needed more tools. And that's why I saw education, because it has opened more opportunities for me to advocate, to understand, to help organize more resources for families who are in need or people who are unhoused that are in need, to help communicate narratives in a way that helps to build empathy and compassion, the compassion of Christ, right? Mm-hmm. Because in Matthew 9, it says when he saw them weary and helpless, he was moved with compassion, right? I love that verse, and it's one of the verses that kind of moves me to seek education and also build more capacity in my articulation of the work that we do, but also to be able to serve the folks that God loves.
Well, this concept of education as a tool
Yes.
to expand your capacity to serve.
Yes.
Because so many are looking at education as a goal just for increased income,
right?
Increased, for their resume, and it's a lot of times only a self-serving goal to get that higher degree. But to have the motivation that I want to learn more so that I can help better.
Yes.
As the goal of your education, whether it's formal or informal.
Yes.
Now you have I'll call that a kingdom motivation for learning.
Yes.
Because now you want to learn for greater impact.
Yeah. But I had to reframe how I saw my pain and how God was able to redeem the things that I had gone through, right? I would say, firstly, I struggled. Why do I need education? Why? Because me and my mom had some back and forth. Why should I go to school? But God showed me, early on, after I had given my life to the Lord, that education could become a vehicle that he could use through me for service. And God was able to show me that in my pain, there could be purpose pulled from it. And I think education is tied to purpose. And so, there are non-traditional pathways and there are traditional pathways. I took a non-traditional pathway, but it was still a pathway where God was using different circumstances, different mentors, different experiences, and all of those things to kind of shape me into the person that I was becoming. And the more I took step after step, the more I learned about what I was more passionate about. Kept asking questions, kept learning myself because, I think most people see education as a task, but I see it as an opportunity to learn how you're wired, but also to learn how you're able to serve in the world.
When I look at you, I'm seeing an African-American Joseph here because he was removed from his home and his family. And he had these in and out experiences. Some were up, some were down. But God guided him through his pain to his purpose. And then, of course, the closing of the book of Genesis, chapter 50.
Yes.
He got forgiveness all up in there. He's got to forgive his brothers and, some men in his life, and all of this. And it comes to the end and he says, he tells them, he reconciles with them like he did with your dad. Yep. And he says, look, don't lose it because God brought me to this place, he says, and then he says, to save the lives of many.
That's right.
God has brought Terence Lester to this place to save the lives of many, particularly those who are in a homeless situation and a helpless situation. And the word that I'm just hearing you and ruminating with you is what you're giving people is hope. You were hopeless in a sense.
Yes.
God brought people into your sphere who gave you hope, who poured into you so that you could see something different. You could look beyond what you could see.
Yeah.
And what that did was move you in a direction, and now you're actually giving back. You're I'll call you a kingdom social entrepreneur.
Okay.
Because what you're doing is you're improving the lives of so many people through your ministry, through your book, but most of all through your life. So let me ask you this: the issue of homelessness is a big discussion today.
Yes.
Okay, politically
Yeah.
and socially and economically, and what to do with all these enclaves. So, if you were speaking to our leaders today from your platform about how we should approach addressing this issue in the most winsome way possible, what would be your statement to our leaders today?
Yeah. There is something very emptying and heartbreaking to stand next to someone and say, how are you? And they tell you, I've been out here for hours begging for dollars and I'm trying to get medication. There's something heartbreaking about working in close proximity with a family who decides not to collectively stay in a shelter because they would be split up and they feel more comfortable sleeping in a car. There's something that is very heartbreaking to know that law enforcement is called on someone for standing outside of a coffee shop trying to access technology because they want to fill out a job application from the cell phone that may not have that many minutes at the end of the month. Homelessness is not a monolith. And I think we have to push back and reframe how we discuss homelessness. Homelessness is one of the only issues or justice issues where you could be labeled for something that you don't have and then punished for trying to survive it without even having the person who is punishing you or creating punitive laws or measures ever have walked in those shoes. There's a human experience on the other side of how people are perceived when they are without an address. I think we need to push back against stigma. I think it takes a village and the whole community to embrace a community that is oftentimes publicly sanitized. I think that we need to use more empathy and compassion, especially those of us who are believers and have the power to create more space and vulnerability for people to be fully seen versus creating the types of barriers that are put in place that keeps people from actually overcoming homelessness. I think we need more housing first models, which is proven statistically and research-wise to be the best pathway for a person to escape homelessness. I think we need to talk about homelessness not just with adults, right? Because the largest population of people who are unhoused are actually children and youth. And most people only think about homelessness in terms of a few people standing on a street corner that are adults. There are students right now in classrooms all across our country that need our support, who will never have an opportunity to become a PhD or graduate high school because of the hardships that are in place, long before they even have an opportunity to dream. We need to have poverty and homelessness at the heart of the discussion nationally. We need to have it in our churches. We need to talk about more complex, multifaceted models of communal care that involves the whole community and not just place it on the shoulders of one particular entity, right? I think it takes all of us working and walking with those who are experiencing homelessness out of that state. I think we need to just talk about this subject with more compassion and care. And lastly, I think we need a stakeholder approach to making decisions as it relates to creating real-time solutions for those who are unhoused. Most times, the people who make decisions about how we should address it don't invite other people to the table who've lived it, who've been proximate to working with the population, etc. And I would say, if you ever want to know what it's like to walk through the experience of homelessness, I would suggest and urge you to go and be proximate with a neighbor without an address.
That was rich. Finally, talk to me as a homeless person. I am a homeless, helpless, hungry person. I got it all. Okay?
You know, the first thing I'm asking you.
Talk to me.
I'm asking you your name.
Okay.
The reason why I always start with a name is because acknowledgement is powerful. To be seen is powerful. To be seen is actually to create home. When I talk about the concept of home, I don't talk about it in terms of four walls and a roof. Home is much vaster than that. Home is the place where you feel seen, accepted, and your sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. The scripture is clear. We serve a God who sees, the God who sees. And seeing has to do with the acknowledgement of your inherent worth and value, the imago Dei. So I am seeing you. I want to know your name. I want to know how your day is going. I want to know what's running through your mind. I want to know what teams you like who just played or lost.
The Cowboys.
The Cowboys. I love Atlanta. So yeah, you know how I feel. I want to know your favorite food, your favorite movie. I started a podcast called the Imagine Dignity Podcast. All of my guests aren't influencers. All of my guests are people who are unhoused. Mm. I have 2 seasons. I've talked to people who are veterans, people who are living on the streets with cancer, who have no access to health care, young men who have been estranged from their families, like all sorts of people. I'm asking your story because you can never meet the needs of people that you've never met. You can never meet the needs of people that you've never met. And I can't serve you if I don't know you. Right? Jesus knew people. I love those scriptures. It's just short phrases, and we've read these many times. It says, and Jesus saw, and Jesus saw, mm-hmm. and Jesus saw. We have to do that type of seeing, and I'm seeing you through creating conversation. And I want to be consistent in creating conversation because the next step from that is relationship. Because not only am I asking you about you, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask me about me.
Well, right now, I'm glad that I'm seeing you in our podcast, and I am been blessed and reinvigorated with your story, but more than your story, with your life of impact from your story. So thank you for blessing us with some of your time for our podcast, and may God continue to work with you and through you and for you and from you for the homeless and beyond, and for those who are sheltered who need to see those who aren't.
That's right.
Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you so much.